part 3 of the individual training design series. This is where I'm taking you through how to program design for better aesthetic changes. Remember that this is mainly focused on hypertrophy and or how to train during a fat loss phase. So how to train to change your body physique, the visual appearance, the aesthetic appearance. So today we have part 3, exercise selection, tempo, variation, and enjoyment. This is where I kind of steer to a different path than most people, or what the typical pyramid of strength is made famous by Eric Helms, which I do agree with for the most part. I tend to focus on these things a little bit sooner than most people, simply because I think in the general population, most clientele, this stuff is very important. Volume, intensity, and frequency is huge. Assessment and execution is huge. Those things are landmarks. They do come first. But if we don't prioritize these things, I do not think we can adhere to those other principles for as long. If our exercise selection is bad, if our tempo is bad, if we don't even know how to control a tempo, if we don't have any awareness behind the proper variations of movement patterns, and if we don't enjoy the program in general, we're not going to adhere to the volume, intensity, and frequency. We're not going to be motivated to push it, so on and so forth. And that's what I'm going to get into today. I'm going to show you why exercise selection, tempo, variation, and enjoyment is actually far more important in the general population and even in advanced individuals than most people believe. And I think the reason is because we can't study a lot of these things. We can do research on volume, on frequency, on intensity. We can do different studies on how the body moves and how the body performs, but it's very hard to do any studies on exercise selection, variation, enjoyment. Tempo has been studied and the studies aren't favorable for muscle growth, but I'll show you why I think it's important still. Now, let's kind of get into these different things. So the first point we're gonna go over is exercise selection. So this is literally just choosing the exercises you are going to do to accomplish the volume, intensity, and frequency that you've already selected based on part 2. So part 2, we talked about how much volume you need. But what exercises should you choose in order to accomplish that volume? The main reasons I want to go over this are because A, biomechanics, B, imbalances, C, joint positioning, and then last, strength potential. So, biomechanics. This is the idea that you move a certain way. Everybody's biomechanics is different because everybody's limb lengths are different. Everybody's joint positioning is different. Everybody's flexibility and stretch shortening cycle of a muscle, how far you can go with range of motion, is different. Therefore, your exercise selection is going to be different than mine based on your biomechanics versus mine. Therefore, I need to have a proper exercise selection to choose the exercise with my best personal biomechanics, my best ability to perform that movement, that exercise, or I won't accomplish full range of motion volume. If we know that volume is the precursor for growth, but I'm choosing exercises that don't agree with my movement patterns, I'm doing a bunch of junk volume. I'm not getting the most out of that volume. So I could actually choose a better exercise and do less volume and get more out of it. Does that mean exercise selection is more important than volume? No, not at all. Volume is what allows us to grow, the work done. But we have to choose the right exercises based on our biomechanics so we can get the most out of that volume because everybody moves differently. Imbalances. Volume doesn't achieve or accomplish or improve imbalances. Imbalances are deficiencies. If one side is greater than the other, if one side is stronger than the other, if one side has poor movement compared to the other. Increasing volume is not going to do anything for that. Exercise selection, however, is going to do something for that. We can do a unilateral movement, single leg squat instead of a squat if we have imbalances within our hip, within our quad, within our knee, so on and so forth. So now exercise selection becomes really important because we can remove imbalances using volume, but we can't use that volume to improve muscle mass on one side to improve that imbalance if we don't prioritize exercise selection. Because if we're just focused on volume, we're not individualizing or isolating the imbalance we need to improve in the first place. Joint positioning. This is something that's becoming more popularized, and I only know of one study that actually looked at this. And it's really, really fascinating. It's something I implement into a lot of my programming, and I'm so happy they did this study. What they did, they took individuals and they equated volume and intensity. So the amount of weight lifted and the amount of volume totally done was equated. It was completely equal. One group did 9 sets of neutral shoulder curls. What that means is my shoulders are in a neutral position. They're not in flexion and they're not in extension. they're neutral, and I'm doing curls, 9 sets, same volume, same intensity. Group 2 did 3 sets at neutral, 3 sets at shoulder flexion, and 3 sets at shoulder extension. So the joint positioning was different. The volume was equated, the intensity was equated, and the group that varied their joint positioning grew more muscle. What does that tell us? It tells us we can accomplish this more muscle growth with the same amount of volume if we factor in joint positioning. This means supination versus pronation versus neutral grip. This means flexion, extension, and neutral positioning of different joints with your hip, with your knees, with your shoulders, all these different things. So another example would be a lying leg curl versus a seated leg curl. One has hip extension, one has hip flexion. You're doing a leg curl regardless. But if we vary, we can accomplish more growth without adding more volume or intensity. What does that mean? It means that neurologically, we can recover better because we're doing the same amount of volume, but we're getting more growth because we're varying our joint positioning, versus having to increase the intensity or the volume to accomplish more growth, which would damage the nervous system more, which is fine, but in excess, over time, it's harming our recovery. So to speed up recoverability, we can just vary the joint positioning. You can't accomplish that without exercise selection. Last, we have strength potential. Some people just have different strength potential. Your personal strength curve is completely different than mine. So I might be really, really good at one-arm dumbbell rows. That's where I excel in. I'm more motivated to do it. My limb lengths are better positioned for it. My joint positioning is better suited for it, whatever it may be. My biomechanics and my strength potential in a one-arm dumbbell row is greater. Yours is greater in a supinated grip barbell bent row. Same muscle groups, but your potential there is greater. If we just look at volume, that's great, but if my potential is better in a different exercise, I need to change my exercise selection in order to get the most out of my strength potential. And that varies person to person. This could factor with biomechanics, joint positioning, imbalances, limb length, all these different factors. But the point is your strength potential is greater on some exercises compared to mine, which is greater in other exercises. That is not accomplished without focusing on exercise selection. So because of all 4 of those reasons, exercise selection becomes so important for changing our physique. Because yes, volume, intensity, and frequency is very important, but without exercise selection, we can't make the most out of volume and intensity and frequency. So this becomes way more important than most people seem to believe. Tempo. This one, I will say, does not pan out in studies, but I have an argument for it. In most studies, we see slowing down the negative. For example, this is the best example we could possibly use because most people know during the eccentric phase, when we slow things down, that's where the muscle fibers tear more. It creates more muscle damage. Muscle damage is one of the precursors for growth. So if we do a slow negative, we create more muscle damage, we have to recover, rebuild more, we're gonna get bigger, right? Wrong. When we slow down the negative, our volume lowers because we can't perform as many reps because it's more tiring. And volume is more important for growth. So in the study showing negatives, the only way it led to more growth is if you could increase volume with those negatives. You cannot increase volume with negatives unless you have a partner who will do the concentric for you. And what that means, it means doing a bench press with well more weight than I can press, but controlling it down as slowly as I can and emphasizing that eccentric, that negative phase, and then allowing somebody else to pick it off my chest. So I'm not even doing the concentric or the positive. I'm only doing the negative. It's very hard for people to adhere to that long term because you have to have a spotter on every single thing you do. Therefore, negatives aren't that important, especially if they're going to lower your total volume and not allow you to accomplish the amount of volume you need to grow. So where does this come in play? Where does this become important? Well, control, first of all. We talked a lot about junk volume so far in the series. If I am doing curls without a tempo, I might get sloppy, rush the form, swing them up, use my traps, use my low back. Now I'm not even accomplishing true volume in my bicep. But if I learn mind-muscle connection and I learn control through varying my tempo, slowing down, pausing, slowing down, now I can enhance my mind-muscle connection and I can keep my volume where I need it to be. Also, it can help prevent injuries. And I wrote that right here. Avoid junk volume, movement quality, and tendon health. All of these things are really just surrounded by controlling the movement better through a mind-muscle connection, neurologically understanding what you are doing throughout a movement pattern, and avoiding banging up your joints because you are rushing through a movement and you are not controlling it with the muscles. Remember that your nervous system controls your muscular system, which moves your skeletal system. But if you don't have physical control inside of your muscles, you cannot properly control your skeletal system, aka your joints. When we use our joints incorrectly, we have joint injuries, we have tendon issues, ligament issues, and just general injuries that prevent us from going to the gym. So although tempo doesn't directly lead to more muscle growth, it allows us to better perform the movements we are chasing and avoid junk volume. Therefore, our total volume is more beneficial because it's actually in the muscles we are trying to work. We actually have some kind of sense and logic behind what we are doing. We know what we are doing and we know that we are improving. So once again, this is indirect to muscle growth, but this allows less injuries, longevity in the gym, and better quality volume, which is the precursor for growth. Next, we have variations. Non-volume progression is the first one. Progressions are anything that we can do to get better at a movement. Usually for muscle growth, this means adding weight, adding volume, adding reps, adding sets, some kind of progression to do more work. That's what leads to growth. However, if you enhance the skill behind a movement, you are still chasing further growth and you are removing different imbalances and sticking points, which I wrote right here, to make sure that you can break through different plateaus. Example, if I'm doing the bench and every time I get to a heavy load or those top end sets, I can't get past this lockout phase. What does that tell me? It tells me that my triceps are weak because my triceps, the job of my tricep is to extend my elbow. If I'm struggling on the bench every time I get halfway, my triceps aren't helping me finish the movement. What do I need to do? I need to create a better exercise selection so that I can change the variations behind what I'm doing to enhance my triceps to finish the bench. Once I can get better at bench, I can handle more load. Once I can handle more load on the bench, guess what? I increase my volume on the bench, I build my chest. Usually that means doing close grip bench press, it means doing dips, it means doing push downs, doing isolation movements for my triceps to enhance the bench, to enhance my volume, to enhance my growth. So again, it's indirect, but we need to focus on that. And progressions usually come from different variations of movements. It could also be loading patterns. Are you doing back squats all the time? Try doing a front squat. Try doing a Zercher squat. Try doing a split squat. Progressions through movement capacity and non-volume based progressions is a really good way to consistently improve your training. Sticking points is related to that. And then lastly, avoid injury. If you know that every time you do a back squat, you get hurt, your low back ends up getting hurt, stop doing back squats. Pick a different variation. This very much so ties to the exercise selection, but a squat is a squat. You can choose different variations within your exercise selection. So although your exercise selection needs to be a squat to build the growth that you want to see, you may need to pick a Zercher squat or a sandbag squat or a split squat or a front-loaded squat, any type of squat that's different than a barbell back squat so you can avoid injury. That's the number one reason. And if we can avoid injury, we can stay in the gym for longer. If we can stay in the gym longer, we're more consistently working in that volume that allows us to grow. So again, indirectly, variation is going to help us hit our volume needs to grow or to maintain muscle on a cut. The last one, which I would arguably say isn't backed by studies, but it is the most important thing, especially in general population, is enjoyment. You need to enjoy your training programs. Again, this all kind of ties into exercise selection, but if we enjoy what we are doing, it's different. So if you like doing negatives, do negatives, because if you feel a good pump, do negatives. If you like doing low rest periods so you constantly feel like you're working, do low rest period. Does science say that's the best way to accomplish more volume? No. But still, if you enjoy it, you should do it. If you like doing different exercise selections every week, if you like working on your imbalances, if you like changing tempo or variation, any of these things I'm talking about, anything that allows you to enjoy your training more, high volume, high intensity, low intensity, different training splits, high frequency, cardio, just training, anything, you should do them. Drop sets and things like intensification techniques that we know really just kind of add up to volume. So if the volume is equated, they're pointless, but they're super fun. So if you enjoy them, do them because it's going to keep you motivated. And I think a lot of people forget that if you're not motivated in the gym, your effort lowers. The more your effort lowers, the lower your intensity gets, the lower your volume gets, the less gains you're going to get, the less likely you are to reach your your maintenance volume during a cut. Everything in the gym suffers if your motivation drops. And if you're not having fun, you're not motivated to even get to the gym. And especially if you're on a fat loss phase, you got to be motivated because your inhibition, your moody, your irritability, all these things increase as your calories decrease. So you better make your training fun so you can actually adhere to the gym and you can stay motivated to go. Again, adherence and consistency is really how we wrap that up. You need to actually have fun. And a lot of these things need to change that. So we're going to talk about periodization in this series. We're going to talk about specific progressions in this series. We've already talked about training, volume, intensity, and frequency. We're going to talk about all these things that are backed by science that really do lead to more growth or better results. But if you don't enjoy your training, what are you doing? And how long are you actually going to be able to do it for? Because adherence and consistency are always the things that lead to the best results. All right, guys, so part 3 is exercise selection, tempo, variation, and enjoyment. These things truly do matter a lot, some directly and some indirectly, but they indirectly allow us to actually accomplish the volume, intensity, and frequency that leads to growth. If you want to get more education on training, if you want to get better programming than what you're doing right now and actually have a system to follow inside the gym every single day of the month, check out the Boom Boom Elite, which is linked in the description. It's all of my best training programs and my guidance on a daily basis to help you get through them. If you want more free content, check out boomboomperformance.com.